the Learning Sciences Brown Bag Talk at Rutgers. Today's speaker is Brittany Marshall, who is my doctoral student and is currently collecting her dissertation data. Brittany mostly focuses on Black girls' experiences in mathematics education, particularly focusing on affirming spaces and understanding the instructional practices of teachers who support Black girls. What you're going to hear about today is a little bit different, but is going to be drawing on some of the same theoretical perspectives. And so you're going to hear a little bit about imperialism in mathematics and the ways in which it creates exclusionary math logics. I guess I'll say a couple more things about Brittany. First of all, she has been unbelievably productive as a doc student. At last count, I think she had 7 publications, like 4 or 5 journal articles, a couple book chapters. She's been very successful in publishing. She recently had a paper come out in a special issue of Teachers College Record. And so, yeah, she's a phenomenal doc student and scholar, and I will let Brittany take it away.
Hey, everyone. Can you all hear me? I don't know how to share. Okay. Okay. I'm like extremely nervous. So I'm just going to start by sharing these norms from, I'm the grad student rep for the SIG Math Army or Research and Math Ed at ARA. And, you know, sometimes we have discussions that are a little bit more touchy, and you'll see why I'm talking about that in a second, but just wanted to share some norms with you all. So if you could take a second to read these norms. Also, if you want to take pictures, you can. So, all right. Kind of get the gist of it. All right. Oh, sorry. So, yeah, that's the title. So welcome. I'm going to be talking about anti-Blackness and white supremacy in math education. And the title of this talk comes from a really crazy experience I had that I'm going to get into. So first I want to start though with a land acknowledgement. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land that you're on, and to seek understanding, to understand your place and within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation in it. And something that I always think about is that we live on stolen land that was toiled by stolen hands. And that's something I always keep in the back of my mind. Being in New Jersey, I live on Lenape land, but I'm from Chicago, which means that I was born and raised on land shared by several people, including the Kickapoo, Peoria, and Potawatomi. So, my positionality, and I don't know, Dan, if you noticed, you made the board finally. So, I am from Chicago, born and raised on the South Side. Before becoming a math PhD student, I worked as a math teacher in Chicago, specifically most of the time teaching Black students, which is really important to me because I had such an interesting and not so good math education. Before that, though, I practiced architecture. I went to University of Illinois and North Carolina State University for architecture, and I've spent a lot of time around the world studying architecture and honestly studying the products of imperialism, because the built environment, especially around the world, is a direct reflection of imperialism. So let's get started. All right. So the summer of 2020, remember this, Drew? All right. Nicole Hannah-Jones posted a saying that said something like, if children keep failing the standards, then maybe we should change the standards. I retweeted this in agreement, and then got into a debate with someone. And I didn't realize I was being goaded into this debate. I just thought Twitter was cool. I was meeting all these academics. Every once in a while, somebody famous would retweet me or like something. I started Twitter seriously 6 months before this, just because people told me that's where the math academics were. So anyway, I retweeted this in agreement, and then got baited into an argument that I didn't even know was a thing. And so I'm talking to the person, going back and forth, and they keep saying, what about 2 + 2 = 4? Because, and I was like, I'm glad it's funny. It wasn't funny for me, but that's real. So anyway, and I was like, well, 2 apples and 2 cars don't equal 4 anything. The guy kept going, and I was like, no, 2 + 2 = 4 is cultural, and it's because of imperialism and colonialism. We think that's the only way of knowing. That's what I said, the only way of knowing. Not that it's wrong, just that it's not the only way. So yeah, I went to sleep. I signed off, went to sleep. A firestorm ensued the next day, but I'll get back to that. So what I'm going to be talking about. So as a result of Western imperialism, even spaces seemingly neutral as mathematics and math education are deeply entrenched in white supremacy and hegemony, right? So a lot of this construction of neutrality specifically comes out the 1950s, and this is the work that my advisor is working on right now. When many mathematicians backed value eugenicists worked to categorize math into both pure and applied math. So this is when it started. This is a popular perspective and a recent one. In the past 60, 70 years, we actually think of math this way. And it was this contested and divorce in math from the physical world, and mostly won out in creating the way we think of pure math. So pure mathematicians are the smart ones. All right, that's the way we see math now. So let's talk about Western imperialism and ethnomathematics. So a semester before the crazy thing that happened in 2020, snap if you had Dr. Desai's class. Anybody had her? Okay, so maybe you read this book and it blew my mind. So before the Twitter attack, I read the book Learning to Divide the World by Canadian educator John Walensky. And he explains how Western imperial powers use history, geography, language, literature, and science to other the rest of the world. The science part stuck out to me because I felt like it started to explain a lot of things I was finding out. It was a 2016 survey of first and second year medical students. And these medical students in 2016 still believed that Black people had thicker skin and therefore were not able to feel pain the same way their white patients were. I see the faces. Yeah, this is in 2016. So this idea that, othering is happening and still current, really still happening was really important to me. But one thing that stuck out about this book is that I noticed that he did not talk about math at all. And so that just got me thinking, and I really wanted to figure out why math isn't included. And so I actually I'll get to that in a second. So this led me to ethnomathematics. So in the Brazilian mathematician, I never say his first name right, so Ubertrand D'Ambrosio. He coined the term ethnomathematics, which means the study of math and culture. Along with the examples shown. Well, what's A² + B² = C²? What's that called? Say it. Say it again. Pythagorean theorem. But what if I told you that this right angle theorem was used 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born? So let's think about that. Who's being centered? Whose math is being centered? Also, what number am I representing? Say it. What if I told you I was representing 8? Where's it coming from? the spaces in between? Yeah. So in Papua New Guinea, over 700 languages are spoken. There were 650 different counting systems found, and they were not base 10. All right. So essentially, the fact that many of these practices and historical whitewash have been historicized or whitewashed shows the functioning of imperialism to appropriate or wipe out cultural mathematical practices. So what I'm arguing is that the destruction of mathematical cultures is a direct reflect of imperialism. That the fact that this is historical, that you don't know it, is imperialism. So, Dr. D'Ambroso believed that math was the only universal language. He actually made this statement, which I do think is beautiful, but I also think it talks about a specific time, even though it was in 2007. The idea of building up civilizations that reject inequality and arrogance and bigotry and all of that, essentially so that other people can see their places in history and know that we all definitely speak the same language. I actually disagree with that. I argue that ethnomathematics directly disrupts the notion of mathematics being universal. Just as different languages have different words that don't perfectly translate into English, Spanish, or French. Different cultures have mathematical symbols and values that vary and do not always translate perfectly into our numbers and symbols. Exposing all students to ethnomathematics would allow for genius and ingenuity of all cultures and societies to shine and be learned. So that's my thoughts on ethnomathematics. But then let's go a little bit further with white supremacy and imperialism in today, like its current living experience. So Danny Martin's like my hero. So he wrote this manifesto called Beyond Missionaries and Cannibals Who Should Teach Math to African-American Children. In it, he talks about this imagined or this myth of the racial hierarchy of mathematical ability. So whether we think about it or not, there's this hierarchy that puts whites and Asian students at the top of the hierarchy and Black, Latina, and Indigenous students at the bottom. It doesn't matter that Asian students score higher than white students on almost every test, right? White students don't get, what is it? What am I looking for? Like a negative association with the test the way if a Black student scores 4. All right. So in this, Indigenous, like I said, Black, Indigenous, Latin, and Black students are at the bottom. Black students are seen as not only like an ability, but just being Black is a crime in math classes, and they need to learn how to navigate whiteness to do well. Also, Denise Brewerly Kennedy studied white math teacher educators. That's the work I do. And found that these teacher educators had no problem talking about every other social issue, gender, everything, to their pre-service teachers, but never spoke about race and how it affects experiences in math classrooms. And when she was asked why, she said it was because it made her uncomfortable. Most scholars discuss the math classroom as a space to assimilate students to Western math practices. We also know that from Sandy Grant's work in Red Pedagogy of governmental and church-run boarding schools that forced Indigenous children to learn whiteness to become civilized. And then we also know the same thing is happening with Latinx students who can't speak their home language in math classrooms, are given assessments in English and have to use Google Translate. Think about the mental ability and how much that would drain a student to have to continuously translate back and forth instead of us seeing where they are, like meeting them where they are, learning a few words in whatever language to be able to communicate with them, or having them write in their home language and then we do the work of translating it. Then some other guy I know used whiteness as property. This was interesting, which is one of the tenets of critical race theory. And he calculated that white people earn around $400 billion in a lifetime over Black, Indigenous, and Latino people because of institutional racism, like tracking, AP test. I know we feel good about being in AP calculus in high school. It's garbage, it's trash. It is, right? And biases by school counselors. His analysis shows that this imperialism produced material consequences directly through math education. Neutrality divorces math from culture. Then it seems that mathematics shows the suppression and destruction of mathematical cultures in the face of neutrality. Missionaries and cannibals continue to act as assimilation to Western math in schools. So all of this is continuing to act. We're experiencing imperialism right now in schools. So all of this stuff led me to this historian and mathematician, Alan Bishop. He believed that math was anything but objective. In fact, he believed that math was one of Western imperialism's biggest and most successful weapons. So specifically, he broke it down into three different categories that math fits into. The first one is rationalism. Things have to make sense and be reasonable. Therefore, it would be easy for Western colonizers to dismiss different cultural mathematical practices that relied on local, non-Christian spiritual connections and knowledge, right? So if I'm one with the earth, we're all one with the earth and all of that. Like that is not Christian to think that way, to think of different deities and all of that. So it can't be rationalized, therefore it's not right. The next thing is objectivism, not objectivism, objectivism. And this is to be able to remove an abstract thought from its context. So to remove anything from context is objectivism. This is important because many cultures encourage the belief that individual beings or objects belong and exist in relationship with everything else. Therefore, decontextualizing as a way to make it generalizable makes that being or that object meaningless. This leaves no space for abstract thought. The last one is power and control. Either as directly applicable concepts and techniques or indirectly through science and technology, we understand how mathematical ideas are used in many aspects of our life. Either as, mathematics is used in many ways to control the physical and social environments. The use of numbers and measurements in trade industry, commerce, administration, specifically in all engineering, continues to emphasize the power and control of values of math. So when we think about it, it makes sense that maybe I think it's the top 7 most, like the top 7 billionaires of the world are connected with engineering and math. So if you think of, what's his name with the car, Tesla? Elon Musk, like he did engineering for undergrad. So did Bezos. So go back to this. So I told y'all what happened. Had this stupid conversation with Twitter that some of us nerds know about the 2 + 2 = 4. So I go to sleep. I wake up the next morning to being retweeted hundreds of thousands of times. You remember that, right?
I'm assuming it was James.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ended up on at least 16 alt-right websites. What I didn't know is that women, math educators all over the world have been being attacked for any views that they have outside of math being universal. My advisor is a white man and believes the same things that I believe, and it has never been attacked. But women and other marginalized groups get emails to their colleagues, college deans, department chairs, other math ed professors, things like that, telling them to get kicked out of PhD programs or fired from their jobs, getting violent emails to their school accounts, getting DMs, where they're being threatened with called the C word, R word, N word, a bad teacher. threaten and rape and kill them. If you look at all these tweets and these arguments, you'll see that Rochelle Gutierrez, Catherine Ye, Marian Dingle, Lori Rubel, Shraddha Sharuti, and others are arguing for different cultural exchanges of mathematical knowledge, while these others are interested in neutrality, a direct result of imperialism. So all of this argument, these people, some of them are like paid actors on Twitter and things like that, but they're essentially just fighting for this universality of math. And it's so crazy to me because if anybody has ever been a teacher, you know we don't even care about math that much. You know, as society, we don't care enough about math for this to be the issue. So this brings me to a lot of the theorizing in the work that I'm doing now. This experience that happens brings me to the work that I'm doing now. And what we're talking about now is how all of this stuff leads to traditional math logics. And so when I'm using logics, I'm using Acker's definition, which borrows from sociology, institutional logics, which is a shared set of underlying assumptions that math, gender, and race, as well as institutional practices rooted in these assumptions. So when we think about our math classrooms, the way we engage in math classrooms, and Dan and I argue that there are three categories of logics to consider. The first is that math is abstract or pure, that is neutral. And again, we can think about math being a study of numbers, dealing with comparison in quantities, recognition of pattern, measurement in time and space, and all of that. We can conclude that all cultures and societies around the world have developed unique ways of interpreting these things. So while the current iteration of math is part of the Western colonial project, math is a human activity. Therefore, it has to be cultural. It can't be neutral. The next category is the one we're probably the most familiar with, ability. Raise your hand if you feel like you're not a math person. If you would say, I'm not a math person. Thank you for being honest, little mama. I see you. Thank you for keeping it real. You people are being honest. Right. Well, I think that's BS, but that's for another day. We can all do math, like, you know, whatever. I think you had crappy teachers. We can all do math. So if we think about this math ability, I want you all to think about those time tests in elementary school. Remember them timetables? I was crazy, y'all. I used to tell my students they had to beat me at time tests. I don't know if it was an ego stroke. I was trying to make them feel competitive and good, which is crazy, but whatever. Anyway, these logics allow us to accept inadequate math curriculum and teaching by blaming it on genetics. One example is the constant referring to standardized test scores and pushing the achievement gap when it's really a resource gap, right? I told you all about this racialized hierarchy of math ability. Hottinger actually talks about gender version, where masculine identities are at the top of the math ability hierarchy, and then femininity and any kind of alternative gender expressions are at the bottom. So people are pushed out of math classes. And if you're pushed out of math classes, you're also pushed out of engineering. So more recently, the learning loss due to COVID shows that how thinking about outcomes without examining the socioeconomic disparities and systems of white privilege produce interpretations that position white, Black, and Black, Indigenous, and Latinx students as inferior. So we gotta remember that. The last categories of these logics are math activities. So in classes, homes, tutoring centers, math is presented as a competition. I just told you, right? Having students play like games against each other and all of that in math, with one best way to solve the problems. This leads to another logic of it being an individual activity. These logics, along with learning math, being about repeating procedures and formulas, and that math only occurs when teacher tells, helps us to guide a society of meritocracy, which is based in capitalism. So, in capitalism, values individual achievement over collective learning and responsibility. So, that is where I'm at. This is like the beginning of my dissertation. So, I don't really have a way of ending this. I guess I can. I don't know. This is what I'm at. That pizza, drinks, whatever.
So maybe we can open the floor up for questions. If anybody wants to dive in, you can raise your hand. Brittany can call on you or just go straight ahead. Yeah, we've got a question at the back.
Not so much a question, but just I think I've never seen someone come at this like this before. And I feel like there should be more of this conversation. And so I just want to commend you for taking this on and like coming up here and like having like just owning it and being, you know, courageous to go into such a hugely like, I feel like math and all of that is just so protected, like what its identity is in our society. So you keep doing it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's really interesting you said that. I really didn't know that people cared this much about math. I thought it was kind of common knowledge that, you know, if we all speak different languages and come from different parts of the world, that math, like anything else, would be cultural. I honestly didn't think this was an argument. And so to get attacked the way I did, and a lot of really crazy stuff happened. And some big parts is like having really high blood pressure and having to be rushed to the hospital and things like that. And it's also why I'm really close with Dan, Andrew. Like this is like one of the main reasons I became close with them, because they were so helpful for me. But yeah, this is really hard. And my aunt actually suggested that I have some of the emails and stuff that I was sent. And by the way, you can type my name in, put 2 + 2 = 4, you'll see some stuff. But my aunt suggested that I have some of the emails, but it's actually really traumatic for me. So like even just the last few weeks of thinking about this and doing a talk, like I feel like I have to work through it, you know, for my own self. And I think like the stuff that happened was like a really crazy, dramatic way, like a dramatic thing that actually happens to a lot of people in math classes. So I just feel like it's something that no matter how mucked up it is for me, I still have to work through it. So hopefully some good will come out of it. Thank you so much. Yeah.
We actually have a question online, Dr. Waters. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hey y'all. Hey.
Hey, Dr. Ortiz.
It's good to be here. Thank you for sharing your work, Brittany. You know, it's right up my alley thinking about right like how even like language becomes cultural, particularly for Black students as well, right? Like and how they fit into that conversation of thinking about mathematics being cultural. I was wondering too, right? Like, so part of what I've always thought about in my work is thinking about like, and I'm curious if you're making this kind of designation or this distinction or nuance in your work too, to think about how, like, part of what I hear you saying, right, like, is how mathematics itself is cultural, right? But do you also make the nuance to think about like how the teaching and learning of mathematics itself is cultural as well, right? Like, is that where you're trying to go with some of your work?
Yeah. I'm doing that too, like, and I know a lot, I pull a lot from Dr. Joseph's work, who is online. Hey, Ma. But like a lot of her work, and it talks about how you know, a lot of students do learn better in community. Like one thing that we shouldn't do is if we have Black girls like in our classrooms, don't separate them. If they choose to sit together, let them sit together. Because that's also cultural, like learning in community and learning through like all of the other conversations that happen with math. So I think about that too, like the idea of like sitting in rows, right? And having to do assignments by yourself, everything out of context, just learning numbers or whatever, instead of it being in context through stories or through actual experiences that happen in life. All of this is cultural. It's a human activity. So I think I answered it. I don't know.
He gave you a clap. so-
Okay.
Thank you for this, and obviously, first of all, fuck James Lindsay.
Exactly.
I was there for that too, and it was horrible, and I didn't realize that was you, who was part of that.
Mhm.
So apologies. That whole debacle, besides being politically just nonsense, it felt like a lot of people talking past each other,
Right.
and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. My feeling is that like what seems plausible in this argument is that the portrayal, the way that we do math, the way that we, depict math, all of that is cultural.
Right.
And then there's like a stronger philosophical claim that like mathematical truths themselves are culturally relative.
Right.
So like 2 + 2 is true here, but not over there,
Okay.
or over a different country or something.
And
like
if we
that.
start doing different, what is it called? Modules, the mod, whatever, you know what I'm talking about, Lou, but keep on.
Yes, I'm curious, is your view sort of that first position or the second position? Like, is it the stronger claim that like there are no objective mathematical truths at all, or that there are some, but our portrayals of them are going to necessarily be culturally contextual, and that might make it difficult for us to have objective knowledge about them?
I'm not sure I believe there are mathematical truths, like overall. Like I don't know, but I also admit that I studied architecture before studying math. So the furthest I've gone in math classes was Calc 3. So I'm not gonna act like I'm an expert mathematician. I study how children learn math. I do think that again, I think this is an activity we use math to explain phenomena in the world. And I think, people's based on their experiences, their culture, all of that, then they would see the phenomena differently, right? So I think for me, it's kind of that way. But I'll leave it to mathematicians,
So from an education perspective, would it be harmful for me to say to a student, yes, there are objective mathematical truths, but your learning of them is always going to be culturally contextual, and you need to think about that.
Yeah, I mean,
assumptions.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think so. And also it's hard for me to say the objective mathematical truths. I do think like we learn the math we learn at school, and that's the math we're going to use, whatever, and that's fine. And for this math, this is the truth. So I guess we kind of agree. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for giving me something to think about. Hey, Marina.
Hey. So I mean, I'm always curious when people present kind of like the more theoretical side, like, and you're doing your field work. So I'm curious, like, for a sneak peek of what you've been seeing. And I'm assuming you're not going to share about it. That's okay too. But I'm assuming you would find the logics, like the negative stuff, right? But like, I'm curious if you've also been noticing like some counter logic, some interesting ways that teachers are doing things differently.
I see what you're saying. So essentially this, and then Dr. Joseph's Black feminist math pedagogies are the two theoretical frameworks I'm using in my dissertation. So the way I'm looking at it is talk to teachers, talk to students, and observe their classrooms. I'm looking to see where logics are happening, these logics that we think of in traditional math classrooms. And then I'm also looking to see where teachers disrupt them. And I'm using Dr. Joseph's framework as the disruption. And I see a lot of it. So it's interesting. One thing that was said in my dissertation proposal was that, you're going to see logics and you're going to see students liking the logics, liking the abstract and the ability stuff and all of that. And I see that. So when at one school, I see a lot of math being taught abstractly, not in context at all, a lot of competition, a lot of that. And some of the students that I'm specifically working with are thriving in that environment. But as I look around, a lot of students aren't thriving in it. They just happen to be the ones I'm not studying for my own parameters. But then at another school that I go to, I'm seeing math in context. I'm seeing everything done in groups, and the students figuring out their own solutions, and for like creating the formula through work, and then eventually get into the formula we're going to teach them, whatever. And way more students are thriving in that class and seem happier overall. So I'm noticing that. Okay.
Yeah, so like this has been really fascinating from like a systemic level, but I'm really interested in what the actual classroom looks like. So to that end, in this other classroom, are there like specific teaching practices that mathematics educators are enacting that are supportive of overcoming this type of racial hegemony in the mathematics classroom?
Yeah, I think so. I think the biggest thing that I can think of right now, and this is not like fully analyzing my data, I'm still like in the middle of collecting it. When I think of things that that teachers do automatically is create, like, this seems so simple, but creating lessons that are in context is the most important thing. Like whether it's in like, you know, whether it's relating it to like a soccer game or whatever, or just things going on in the neighborhood. That's the first thing. The other thing is not silencing students, because what happens a lot in math and engineering classes is women get silenced, that not called on or not, you know, tracked and not even told about by counselors to go to certain classes and take certain classes and do certain majors. So do people of color. So those are two big things. So I think, you know, those different teaching practices that happen, but also just human interaction with your students, like actually hearing from everyone and allowing students to talk in their own language, allowing them to speak in their home language. And like, I think as teachers, I think part of it is our job is to help them decode it and make it more academic language or whatever. So, hey, Dr. Kevin.
Soon to be Dr. Brittany. This was incredible. This was excellent. I learned so much. Thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for being so, you know, amazing, you know, in terms of how you're framing this work and the nuance that it's offering us. I have more of a comment. My colleague B called it a comment. Yeah. So, so I'm thinking about like what you're presenting here, and especially on the slide on traditional math logics. And a lot of what I'm hearing you say is that this is rooted in ways of knowing that are associated with capitalism, right? Like the reproduction of capitalism.
Right.
The complicated thing about all of this is, right, and part of what you're pointing out is that our students, Black students, have been told for so long they can't even do this.
Right.
Like you can't do this, right? Like, and so I think for a long time, we've sort of been stuck in, as practitioners or as people who are just concerned about Black students' development, encouraging them to say, you can do this, right? You can do this, but also knowing that this way is rooted in a kind of reproduction of the status quo, which is extremely complicated, right? And then the other part I'm thinking about too is, you know, a part of what I hear you saying is that like, there are different ways of not just sort of engaging with math in the math classroom, but there are different ways of knowing math, right? Like math epistemologies, right? That we have lost because of militaristic imperialism and all kinds of things that have foreclosed our ability to know. It's part of the work then recovering those alternate ways of knowing math, alternate ways of thinking about numbers.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, I think so. And I know D'Ambroso was doing a lot of that work. Dr. Powell on my committee, Dr. Powell was doing a lot of that work. People are uncovering it the same way people are uncovering and reclaiming languages and things like that. I think what becomes difficult is what math is accepted in school, right? And then like, you know, so if, you know, different things are uncovered, do we use this as a, what is it? Those classes, like an extra, what am I trying to say? Yeah, an elective or something like that, like classes based on this as an elective, or do people get to take these as opposed to, you know, the engineering math, you know, whatever, or the, you know, more universal math. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's really fascinating to me. Again, it comes back to reading this book by John Walensky and Dr. Desai's class that just blew my mind that math was never even talked about because it's so ingrained in us to see it as, you know, universal. And again, I just don't think anything is. I don't think anything is universal. So, I mean, I'm still thinking about stuff. This is just,
Absolutely.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Drew.
Yes, I mean, what's so striking about this when I look at this logic is that none of this would be, just to contest those things, would be objectionable in the math ed community. I mean, pretty much, right?
Mhm.
And yet when it's layered with race, right, gender,
Mhm.
it becomes toxic.
Right,
And so it's more than just the challenging of these logics.
absolutely. I thought it was a question.
Kwame,
Okay, a problem, that's realistic. Go ahead.
You're talking about universals, something I worry about, and I also love Lewinsky, I think it's my favorite books. A kind of concern about overcorrection, that
Right.
like anything that was connected to colonialism, we gotta do the opposite,
Mhm.
right? And I feel like I see this sometimes with objections to like objectivity as someone who's a moral realist and thinks there's objective moral truths and thinks that everyone else in this room does too.
Mhm.
I see a lot of people saying there's no such thing as objective moral truths because they think that like that's colonialist and we have to abandon that.
Okay.
Do you feel like there's any sort of, how do you think about like balancing, you know, corrective without overcorrective?
I mean, I think we do it every day, right? Like I'm in a PhD program at a white university getting a PhD, you know what I mean? Like in math education. So, and I teach students, you know, that math that I'm saying is cultural,
Mhm.
you know, so I think we do it every day. I think, you know, humans are, I don't know, like we have layers.
Do you feel like you ever see
Yeah.
examples of these arguments where it's like, that's a little farther than I would take that?
I get what you're saying. I don't know yet though. I don't know, like, but this is me just kind of scratching the surface of stuff too. So maybe there is a point where I'll be like, nah, that's too much, but I also don't know if I will because I still like want like us all to live in our truths, whatever those truths are. You know what I mean? Like, and you know, of different cultures and things like that. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
But so far away from that ever being a concern yet. Like,
Right. I don't think it'll ever get there. Yeah. Yeah. So.
You have some comments online, some from your support team, just supporting what you're saying and providing context. And my laptop's just died, so I'm sorry, I cannot.
Is anyone attacking me?
No,
Okay.
support love.
I get very nervous about it. Y'all don't understand. This was traumatic. So
Yeah, I actually have a question about that. First of all, I'm
Yeah.
really sorry for what you went through,
no,
but
it's all good.
I think like a lot of scholars in this space, especially like women scholars and people from historically marginalized communities, are sort of trying to find this balance between wanting to push their ideas into the public space and make these types of ideas like accessible to the general public, but there's that like obvious, very real fear of backlash, and what you went through is a big example of that. Like, what advice do you have for people who are expecting this kind of backlash, but also want to put their work out there?
So after it all happens, like the craziest thing happened. I told you I was on Twitter for like 6 months before this happened. And then after it happened, it was horrible, but I met like every rock star in math education. And I know that's an oxymoron, but there were people who were rock stars to me and I met them. And it was such a big deal. And it was so amazing to see so many people who, even if they didn't necessarily agree with what I was saying, really felt the need to be supportive and protective of me. And it was wonderful. And I remember talking to Dr. Joseph, who's on the line, and she was like, you know, you're in it now. You're in it. Like, this is your life. So you can either lean into it, you know, write about it and make people, when they like call you names or whatever, have to at least cite you. If they do it, it's because you wrote the paper and they go cite the paper, you know, or you can like, you know, fall back. And I kind of feel like eventually my work is about liberation, right? Like, I think eventually that's where I'm going and that's what I care about. And we care about like abolishing systems and things like that. And if we care about that, then we can't like live in fear. We have to put our work out there and people can challenge it. But that's also the other thing. You have to be okay with people challenging it. And I'm okay with people challenging the word. Please just don't call me names or, you know, threaten to kill me. Like, you know, so. Yeah, but I'm okay with the word being challenged. And I think we just, you know, like you just have to decide this is what it is. But it's hard though. This is really difficult. So I don't want to make it sound like this was easy. This is really like painful experience. And like I said, just even digging up the stuff to make a talk has been very triggering for me. So, but you know, again, I have to work through this. So. and hopefully, my students, my pre-service teachers, all of that, like, if I have to go through this for them to treat their Black students as humans that are capable of anything, then that's okay, So, yeah.
Dr. Joseph has a comment or question.
Okay. Hey, Dr. Joseph.
Hey, lady, I was just gonna ask you, like, who do you want the audience of your work to be? It sounds like you just said teacher candidates, but I don't know if you want to say more about that, because it's a lot of different constituents, a lot of different, you have mathematicians, you have the general public, you have Black children and their families. Like, who is your audience? Who do you want to understand this idea of Western imperialism
Yeah.
shaping, math, logics, and understanding?
Yeah, I think, the way I talk, I always talk. So the way I sound right now is how I always sound. And I write this way. So the kind of, South side of Chicago, folks, whatever, this is how I sound. And I say that to say, like, my work is for, I think, in like a part of my work, or part of the way I see it is my work is for, Black children and the parents and the teachers of Black children, and minoritized children, like, to see that, their work is important, like their being is important and that they belong in the space and things like that. But then at the same time, I'm very interested in, like, teacher educators and actually people who teach math. So people at the university level who teach math, who take part of the tracking and take part of, like, all of these things that, keep others outside of what I think. Even though I think it's, an act of imperialism, I do think math is beautiful and, like, it's exciting. And I think it was the one subject that, like, I lit up when I did well, and that I saw my students light up when they did well, and, like, having those aha moments. And I just feel like, as so many of us are taken out of that. So I don't know. I feel like the work I want to do is for, like, the math community and education community. So
I asked that question because, translating your work is really important. So, I always say I'm with you as far as, let's tear up the system, but children do show up on Monday.
absolutely.
So, like, translating these ideas to help teachers that have to teach Black children
Right.
on Monday, that's a thing.
Right.
It's a whole nother conversation talking with mathematicians in our, arts and sciences departments, right?
Absolutely.
So
And
I guess I'm just asking you to think about, like, where do you actually want to put your labor? Because you won't be able to engage in all of these conversations in an impactful
Right.
and effective way, while also keeping your own self cared for, right? Because these conversations are challenging. So it's really just like a comment for you to think about, like, where do you want to go dive in deep and have these conversations? Yeah.
This is where I want to dive deep for pre-service teachers. I think this is where I want to be. Yeah. Thank you.
A question.
Okay, not a comment.
So, but following up on Dr. Joseph, if much this work focuses on what you might call early mathematics, right? Getting engaged in it. And so are there analogs for these issues as you move up into more advanced mathematics? Or is it really establishing relationships with mathematics early on so that one can then go into some of the more flawless kinds of.
Right. I think a lot of these issues carry on. Like, I know that we've been working on that grant, the Courage Grant, and a lot of that, the information we get from that grant shows, like, a lot of these things even happening at the college level. But I think, after, like, hearing Dr. Joseph, I know that what I'm more focused on is early math, like, the K-12 space, or actually, honestly, like the K to middle school space of math, because tracking happens at middle school. All of this stuff, like, really, the foundation is set earlier, but if you don't have algebra by what is it, 8th grade, you're not taking calculus in high school, which determines a lot of the other stuff you could take. And then I even in talking about that right now, I'm still having this internal like struggle because it gets back to capitalism, right? And what people can major in college. So I'm still struggling with that.
Brittany, can I say something
No.
to Dr. Drew?
Sure.
So I was actually just reading something yesterday about different ways to conceptualize calculus, and that we've accepted a framework of going through calculus around limits rather than understanding it through change. And that approaching calculus through a different lens actually centers it in human activity. But that hasn't been explored because we've accepted a limit kind of definition of calculus and approach. And so I think there are even more advanced kind of mathematics that taking a different approach would actually really kind of reorganize the learning in there. And I think actually place them more around human activity in the physical world. And some work I've been doing on sabbatical actually kind of surprisingly to me has shown that a lot of this kind of neutrality and separating math from the physical world started in the 1950s, and is actually a much more recent project for mathematics. And so I think we've accepted a lot of that now. And so I do think I mean, it's not really my expertise to kind of go into the calculus space and whatnot. But I think there are different ways to approach the mathematics, and that fundamentally brings a different perspective. And I think we've adopted a lot of perspectives that we don't even realize have structured kind of our understanding of some of that mathematics.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, people online.
So good. So good.
Yes. I think still want to question.